With the new upcoming patch 3.15, a new item will be introduced, Poisoned Star. I originally thought that Poisoned Star in its current state wouldn't even make it off the PTS, but as it seems, the item is considered okay to be released. Let's go over the item stats real quick. The item costs 2000 gold, so it's a relatively cheap item. It gives you 30 physical power, 15% crit chance, and the passive is critical hits on enemy gods, afflict them with a weakening poison for 3 seconds. This poison slows them by 20% and reduces their damage output by 20%. Overall, this item has a ridiculously strong passive combined with some other decent stats. Now, real talk here. I don't think that this item will stay in this state for very long because I think it's outright broken in terms of what it offers for such a little price tag. But as this item will be released onto live, it makes sense to look at what the item does for certain characters, which characters can make best use of it, and how it can be implemented in the builds of those characters. I will first talk about specific gods that can make use of it, and then I'll go into a more general build for hunters that can use this. So first, let's look at the assassins. The most obvious assassin for this item is Hunbats. Hunbats has an increased crit chance after every ability he uses, and Hunbats doesn't have the highest burst. Hunbats has a very good synergy with crit. You typically see Deathbringer or Malice being built relatively early on him, but Poison Star gets the job done so much better. Poison Star is a lot cheaper, it also decreases the damage of the enemy, and it slows them down. Combine the increased crit chance with Hunbat's abilities, you will get a lot more basic attacks in, which is crucial for a god like Hunbats that doesn't have the highest scalings compared to, for example, Thor overall. So Hunbats can just chase you down now, crit you, and then just stick to you like glue as soon as you got that crit going. As the item is cheap, it's beneficial to rush it relatively early, so I'd recommend building it in 3rd or 4th slot on Hunbats, depending on what team you're against. Then there's Naja. Naja is a bit more of a critical case, I would say. The point with Naja is that he has guaranteed crits in his ultimate, so you're guaranteed to get that passive. However, you want to ideally kill the target in the ultimate. For that, other crit items like Deathbringer or Malice are much better because you simply get a lot more damage off, especially with Deathbringer. It can still be good, especially because Naja's Sash can crit as well, and he gets an increased crit chance overall, and the item is relatively cheap, but it's a consideration you have to make from game to game. If you want to be an effective assassin that bursts targets down as hard as possible, Poison Star is not all that great. If you're more of a utility assassin that picks out targets and allows their team to take them down after, then the item is awesome, so it's definitely worth considering this on Naja. The third assassin this item has been considered on by many is Serket. Now I don't know why people get this idea that this item would be good on Serket, but it's not. The reason it's not good on Serket is that Serket should not use basic attacks in between abilities. Due to the nature of Serket's passive, ideally you want to use one basic attack at the beginning of the fight and then use all your abilities in order before you use another basic attack. Yes, this item gives you an increased crit chance, but the damage output is much lower than it would be if you were to build Deathbringer in its place. Deathbringer is more expensive and it takes a little longer to come online, but Serket doesn't really make too much use of slows. She either bursts her target or she doesn't. If she doesn't burst her target, then she better get her ass out of that situation instead of trying to kill someone with basic attacks. Basic attacks on Serket are nice to clean off a kill, but after using all your abilities, the enemy should be in a position where you can easily take them down anyways with the basics plus the crits. And if that doesn't happen, then 1 or 2 extra hits from the slow won't make a difference. So there is some logic in building it on Serket, maybe if you're behind and you don't see any other chances, but it's definitely not a core item because it decreases her burst, and the burst is all Serket has and all she needs. Serket is a single target assassin that doesn't do too much with basic attacks. In order to make this item use or be used most effectively, you need to have basic attacks in between your abilities. Then there's also Nemesis. Crit builds on Nemesis have been extremely popular as of late and are extremely potent at the moment with the attack cancel on the shield. I will explain more about this in a later video, but in the end, this item will definitely be helpful for her. At the same time, the question is if you need more slows. Nemesis has 2 built-in slows in her kit. Any more might be overkill depending on the situation, but combined with the other part of the passive that reduces damage against someone like Nemesis, who's already hard to kill, it should be very, very good overall and might potentially replace Wind Demon in some of the builds. You're most likely not going to build it as early, simply because Nemesis has other core items that are more important early on, give her movement speed and penetration, or protection reduction, or cooldown reduction. But once that's done and you're on your last 2 slots, this item can be very, very good. Keep in mind that you're losing the Wind Demon passive though, if you're not building Wind Demon and the passive is extremely strong for Nemesis, or you're losing a decent amount of damage if you're not building Deathbringer afterwards. For Mercury, this item should be relatively good. Mercury can make great use out of getting cheap access to good crit items, and with this plus Wind Demon, he gets exactly that. While Wind Demon seems like a better choice for him overall with the extra movement speed and all that, it's still a nice item for him. Mercury generally wants to maximize his burst and not stick to targets for all too long, but knowing that Frostbound was even popular on him for a while, it's definitely going to be seen, and it's definitely not a bad item by any means, especially because it's so cheap, so I'm pretty sure we're going to see this item as well. The part that is not that important for Mercury compared to the others is the damage reduction, because Mercury typically wants to burst the target before they even deal damage to him. There are other assassins that could theoretically make use of this item, for example Arachne or Willish, but generally you don't want to build on those because this item is only really effective if you're able to build 2 crit items or you have some extra crit potential in your build, and that's mostly not the case for those 2. It can be built as a niche item or if you have very high attack speed otherwise, but overall those are the assassins I think that can make best or actual good use of this item most of the time. And there's another class we should take a quick glance at, which is Warriors. Most Warriors need to build a lot of defense and don't really make too much use of crit items without any additional benefits, but at the same time the damage reduction can be nice. The one Warrior where I would say this item will be very good on is Erlang Shen, simply because he plays more like an assassin anyways and he focuses a lot on basic attacks, so getting that passive off, slowing the enemy and reducing damage against him at the same time is going to be very strong. There are others that could maybe possibly make use of it in weird niche builds, for example Osiris or Raven, because they have enough basic attacks, but at the same time they're not going to invest into crit any more than that, and then it's a gamble if the damage reduction will proc or not. If it procs, it's really good. If it doesn't, then it's kind of a waste of a slot. So very, very situational there. The one that definitely can make use of it is only Erlang Shen in the Warrior category. And with that, we arrive at the Hunters. I think that Poison Star will be a core item on pretty much every Hunter. Some people may still want to go kin size and somehow build a little bit differently, but generally this item will be extremely good for every Hunter, simply because of the freeze slow in combination with the damage reduction, crit, and a really low price tag. This item doesn't bring you the highest DPS compared to some other builds, but if you're trading with someone with any of those other builds, and your passive or the item passive procs, then the enemy will still have lower DPS than you just because of that damage reduction on Poison Star. To explain this a little further, let's just look at the numbers here. The numbers are done on a Ram, on one side versus another Ram, and on the other side versus a Ymir with 3 physical protection items, so a tank and a squishy. So we have the different DPS values. The core build is, in both cases, Ninja Tabi, then a situational lifesteal item, then Executioner, then either Poison Star or Kin Size, then Wind Demon, and then a Deathbringer. So there are 4 build options. Either using Devourer's Gauntlet or Asi as a situational lifesteal item, and then pairing it with either Poison Star or Kin Size. The numbers you can see here should basically tell you all of it. If you build Devils and Poison Star, you deal 632 DPS against the squishy, 291 against the tanky target. If you build Asi and Poison Star, it's 648 DPS against the squishy and 282 against the more tanky target. So against squishies, Asi is a little better. Against tankier targets, Devils is a little better. Devils has the added benefit of having more lifesteal and giving you some more ability damage for abilities, while Asi is a little nicer in terms of attack speed. On the other side, we have Devourer's Gauntlet and Kin Size with 721 DPS against the squishy, 352 against a tankier target, and Asi plus Concise with 759 DPS against the squishy and 352 against a tankier target. Here you can already see that Asi is significantly better when paired with Concise, because the DPS is pretty much the same or higher in all scenarios. For Poison Star, this is not necessarily the case, the reason being that because Devos has high power, your crits are gonna hit harder, whereas the passive from Concise gets procced more by attack speed. Now, looking at these numbers, Kins has higher DPS. However, if you look at the numbers underneath, you see the values for DPS after the reduction of Poison Star has occurred. In terms of the Poison Star builds, this doesn't really matter because it would even each other out, but the Devos and Kins, or the Asi and Kins build matter here. Because in both scenarios, the DPS actually goes below the point of what the equivalent with Poison Star would be. So Devos and Poison Star, once again, at 632 DPS, whereas Devos and Kins are at 577 DPS if you factor in the reduction. And something similar happens in the scenario of Kins. So in the end, the one building Poison Star will have higher DPS from the moment that he crits, and it is relatively likely to crit with full build. And you also have the additional slow against your enemy target, and Poison Star is also cheaper. You could potentially trade out another crit item. You could potentially trade out Wind Demon for more DPS, or you could trade out Deathbringer, which I wouldn't recommend because triple crit is just too good, and I feel like the passive from Wind Demon is really, really potent. But depending on how tanky the enemy team is, that would make some sense. But overall, the DPS of the crit build with Poison Star is insanely good, and there's hardly any reason to skip it. I've also put in the calculations if you were to build Malice in the first build instead of Poison Star, so the old triple crit build, and even then, your DPS against a target that has built Poison Star is lower than your own. So, in short, I don't see any way around this item or any reason for anyone not to build it at some point in the build. The build I would generally recommend here is either going Death Toll into Devourer's Gauntlet, into Ninja Tabi, then either Executioner or Poison Star, depending on if you want some protection shred first, or if you want more trading potential first. This really depends on the matchup. Then the other one, then Wind Demon, and then Deathbringer. This build should work perfectly well in pretty much every situation and on pretty much every hunter, simply because it gives you enough ability damage as well. If you don't want Devos, which I can understand because it has a relatively slow stack time and you get your boots later, then I would recommend Death Toll, Power Boots, Asi, and then once again, in this case you would probably want to go for Poison Star before Executioner because you already have the flat penetration from Asi. So Poison Star, Executioner, Wind Demon, and Deathbringer. Or maybe even pass up on Executioner until later. This core build doesn't really need to be changed, and there's not as much math as there was with the builds beforehand. Obviously, there's still situational items that can be switched out, but this item doesn't have any additional movement speed that would allow for items like Masamuna all too much. But you can do that if you want to rely on the crit in order to get your movement speed because you get the slow anyways. Other than that, I don't see anything that would speak against building this in any scenario ever on a hunter. And that's why I think that Poison Star will eventually be nerfed. This item is way too potent for the price tag. It's so good that if you want to trade directly, it doesn't even make sense to trade it out late game unless you want to focus on objectives or whatever. So that concludes the results for this item build. It's worth pointing out that if you're building an ability-based hunter, you can still build Titan's Bane instead of Executioner, obviously. That's up to you. However, keep in mind that in that case you will have really low attack speed, so you should at least pair it with Artsy. That's it for this video. I hope this was informative and helpful. Thank you guys for watching. I just wanted to let you know again that I'm uploading every day and I'm streaming every day. I will be starting the stream right when I upload this video, so you'll be able to watch me if you want to. Thank you guys for watching. Duke Sloth, out.